It's a little tribute salute to my friend Deborah Shelton's alma mater, Slippery Rock University, because it's a little chilly here today. We're in 2 Timothy 2, verse 1. You then, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And then picking up in verse 2 with an application for the fact that Paul's urge, I won't call it a command, but it's just right under a command, his strongly urged idea, whatever you want to call it. The things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. This is the pattern, the doable, workable, more than feasible pattern for replicating disciples. Paul here is giving a principle to Timothy for the replication of leadership on all levels and discipleship of all levels. Here's in a nutshell, like, have I ever done anything? I'm trying to think. It would take a big nutshell. But anyway, I'm going to give it my best effort at a nutshell, a thumbnail sketch. Paul, let's say he is generation 1. He teaches, preaches, models. Timothy, generation 2, listens, observes, absorbs, applies, assimilates, integrates, all of those things, what Paul has taught. And then Timothy begins to apply those in his life, and he, as generation 2, begins to entrust these things to generation 3. What does that mean? How do you entrust those things? Well, for Timothy, it would have been in the same way that Paul entrusted the truth and the values, the principles that he transferred to Timothy. This assumes that Timothy was paying good enough attention to be able to get it. Okay? Timothy, generation 2, begins that process with generation 3. He entrusts to them these things that he got that were transferred from Paul to himself. Now he transfers those to reliable people. And this is going to not be politically correct, and the most recent editors of the New International Version of the Bible made an attempt to be inclusive of both men and women. So they use the word people. The actual Greek word is men. So the old versions I memorized, and it said, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to reliable men, reliable people. Okay. Timothy demonstrated his reliability to Paul. And so on the basis of that, Paul entrusted all of this, I'm going to call it data, but it's more than data, to Timothy. Timothy then absorbs and integrates this data into his lifestyle, fundamental belief system, and he then transfers it to reliable people. That's important. And I think sometimes it gets left out of the equation generally for church people who are admonished to go and Because what this is a pattern to work from for the fulfillment of the Great Commission. Go and make disciples. All right. We get this admonition, go make disciples, and nobody really knows what that amounts to. Nobody has a very good idea of how you do it, and what are the stages of discipleship, because I think, I'm not going to go down that bunny trail, but I think that it has huge implications. Now, Paul to Timothy says, okay, Timothy, generation 2, you need to transfer this information, these values, this life, the design, God's design for life, to generation 3. And you don't just do this indiscriminately. This you entrust to reliable people. In my experience, the best people to entrust anything to are reliable people. You know what it's like to entrust something to a person who's not reliable. What happens? Well, it may or may not get done, or the execution of it, or the application of it, but unreliable people don't. When you entrust something to an unreliable person, it usually doesn't end well. Paul is saying, Timothy, first of all, find reliable men and women. But those are the people that you want to entrust. This is a treasure, is it not? Those are the people, these trustworthy people, these people of integrity, reliable people. These are the ones you entrust this treasure to. Who, generation 3, right? Their reliability, and there are things involved in this reliability picture here. One is they have a more than a curiosity, more even than an interest in God's design. They are committed to God's design. That's part of the reliability of these people. These people, generation 3, then will teach others. Because, why? Because these people will also be qualified to teach others. What qualifies a person in this generation 3 to teach others, which would be generation 4? Well, first of all, come back to it, they're reliable. Second, they've been taught by a reliable source. Do they need some level of certification? How much do they need to understand? Do you think Timothy understood everything that Paul understood about God's design? I'm pretty sure not. Do these people in generation 3 have to get do they need to know everything that Timothy knows? I don't think so. You don't. Well, you do. There's somewhere, and I can't identify the line, but there is some line of maturity that has to be crossed, right? In order for these people in generation 3 to be qualified to teach others. But it may not be as high as some people say it should be, or believe it should be. Here's one of the things I learned while working in the recovery world under the Celebrate Recovery paradigm. You really only need to be one step ahead of there are sponsors and sponsees. You've got to be one step ahead of a sponsee. In other words, you have to be a little farther ahead on the trail than they are. But the key is you as a sponsor have to continue to be growing and maturing. So one of the outcomes of that is your own life is enriched. Your own recovery becomes more solid. But in addition to that, your sponsee can continue to grow moving forward in their own lives. That's the principle there is the same for this generational transference of the values of God's design, however you want to phrase it. This process of, I don't call it multiplication, I call it replication of disciples. Generation 1, Paul, he downloads to Generation 2, Timothy. Timothy entrusts to reliable people, Generation 3, who through this process become qualified to teach others, so that this is not a linear thing. It's not Paul to Timothy to reliable people to others. No, it's this cycle. It becomes a flywheel. The flywheel effect comes into play. So, well, what are others supposed to do? They're supposed to do what was done to them. Others will then entrust this body of truth, these values, God's design, to others who will be qualified to teach others, who will then be qualified to teach others. And so you have this, that's why it's replication. I don't think you can multiply disciples. You make disciples, and over time, if this pattern is observed, Generation 1 to Generation 2 to Generation 3 to Generation 4 to 5 and 6 and so forth, the math on that becomes exponential, meaning it becomes a multiplication effect, because it's not like Generation 3 goes back and teaches Generation 2, although there is this, the learning is a two-way street. But Generation 3 is speaking into, teaching Generation 4. These are different people. Generation 4 is speaking to a whole new group of people and teaching them, okay? Well, what about Generation 1 and 2 and 3? They're done? No. If you pay attention, there won't be a time, unless you choose to end the dynamic of this process, there won't be a time that God is not bringing people into your life. And maybe not even by the dozens or the twos, but maybe one at a time. And that is not a bad thing. When one disciple makes another disciple who makes disciples, and the one then finds another one to make a disciple who makes disciples, can you see, by replicating disciples who make disciples, that's the principle that Paul was teaching Timothy. It eventually, and it doesn't take long really, to become, for the multiplication effect to happen. It's not all about numbers. It's about individuals. But when individuals seek and teach individuals, amazing things happen. All right, got 30 seconds to say, who are the reliable people that you are teaching? Pray about it. God will bring those people to you. I mean, I'm not making a guarantee. I'm just saying this is what happens in my life. All right. See you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.